I'll pay any price to whoever makes my son speak again. That's how a desperate billionaire turned his own pain into a public announcement. Hundreds of specialists tried. Thousands of techniques were applied. But nothing worked until a cleaning lady walked into the mansion. She carried no diplomas, no protocols, no miracle cures. She carried only an old backpack, a portable projector, and a secret no one there could have imagined. What she discovered in that silent boy's eyes would change not only his life, but also that of his millionaire father. And perhaps yours too. Because sometimes the greatest turning point doesn't come from where we expect. It comes from an invisible connection that only those who have truly felt pain know how to recognize. Stay with me until the end, because this story will show you that deafening silence can be the bridge to the deepest emotional healing. Imagine scrolling through your phone, lost in a sea of trivial posts, when suddenly you come across something completely unexpected. It's not a typical job advertisement or a viral video. It's a post from one of the country's top neuroscientists, and he's offering $1 million research grant. But the condition makes your heart stop. He wants someone to establish innovative nonverbal communication with his son. His tone is cold, technical, as if presenting a scientific paper. But beneath the jargon, you can feel the pain seeping through. The kind of pain we try to control with logic, spreadsheets, and methodology, but that always manages to leak out, creating a deafening silence that no one around seems to notice. How many times have we done the same? Tried to mask desperation with a facade of control? Dr. Arthur, the neuroscientist, isn't asking for help like a father in pajamas by his son's bedside. He's hiding behind his white coat, his impeccable resume, his academic prestige. He posts on a scientific social network, full of articles and debates about synapses. It's as if he's saying, if someone is going to solve my problem, it will be on my terms within my world. But his world, the world of pure reason, is precisely where his 5-year-old son, who stopped speaking after losing his mother, no longer belongs. We want so badly to fix things with the tools we know that we forget the right tool might be the one we've never used. And amidst all that intellectual noise, what remains is only that deafening silence at home, waiting for an invisible connection that no one has yet been able to establish. This announcement isn't just a search for a professional. It's a mirror. It reflects our own habit of thinking everything can be solved with a contract, a formula, a proven method. How many relationships have we tried to save with spreadsheets? How many dreams have we put on hold, waiting for the right moment? Dr. Arthur, without realizing it, is inviting the world to see his vulnerability. He's saying, with the pomp of someone publishing in Nature, I'm lost, but I won't admit out loud. He's offering a research grant, co-authorship, money. But what he's really offering is a crack in his armor. He's hoping someone will see beyond the resume and recognize the exhausted father who spends his night staring at a son who won't respond. It's the desperation of someone seeking a turning point that science alone cannot provide. Let's do an exercise here. If you had to look at your own public announcements, the ones you make to the world, what would be behind them? Sometimes we post a smiling photo on Instagram, but inside we're begging for real connection. Sometimes we accept a job we don't want because the title looks good, but we're terrified of risking what truly moves us. This scientist, with all his intelligence and fame, is trapped in the same trap, believing the solution to his son's silence will come from a scientific paper. He doesn't realize that his son doesn't need to study. He needs someone who understands that silence is also a form of speech. And until he realizes that, he'll remain surrounded by the world's best professionals, but utterly alone, searching for a universal language he hasn't yet found. He still hasn't understood that emotional healing doesn't come from a diploma, but from a presence that welcomes without demanding anything in return. It's as if life is giving him a golden opportunity, disguised as failure. He thought he was making a scientific announcement, but unintentionally, he opened a crack for the unexpected to enter. Because let's be honest, what serious scientist would publicly expose their own pain as a research subject? He's exposed, vulnerable, even as he hides behind jargon. And it's in this blind spot that the magic can happen. Someone, somewhere will read that post and see not an academic challenge, but a cry for help. They'll sense that there's a greater purpose waiting to be discovered. And then, my friend, the story will take a turn that no scientific methodology, no matter how advanced, could have predicted. What happens when someone like that, someone who lives by logic and proof, encounters a response that doesn't fit into any graph, but touches exactly that invisible connection he didn't even know existed? That's what we're about to explore next. While Dr. Arthur was surrounded by cameras and spotlights, making his announcement that went viral in less than 24 hours, someone was watching from a place no one would imagine. It wasn't a fellow researcher, a curious reporter, or one of those opportunists already scheming how to catch the millionaire's attention. It was a woman who carried in her hands a gift that the academic world could never measure. Her name was Luna, and while most people saw a scientific challenge, she saw something much deeper. A boy lost within his own silence, just as her brother once was. Luna wasn't a doctor, didn't have published papers, or an impeccable resume. She was a street artist, specializing in light painting and graffiti, known for creating visual worlds that spoke to people no one else could reach. Children with severe autism, elderly people trapped in the fog of Alzheimer's, young people locked in mutism that doctors had already labeled as hopeless cases. For her, this wasn't a mystery. It was her universal language. What made Luna different from all the specialists Dr. Arthur had already hired? The answer is simple but powerful. She didn't try to fix anyone. She didn't look at silence as a problem to be solved, but as a territory to be explored. While therapists applied protocols, she lit candles and projected stars onto ceilings. While doctors measured brain waves, she drew memories with light that no one else dared to touch. Her brother, who is now a famous science YouTuber, spent years in selective mutism after their parents' violent separation. And it was Luna, still a teenager, who discovered that the only bridge to reach him was through art. She didn't read child psychology books, but she learned through experience that sometimes an image projected on a wall says more than 1,000 words. And it was that invisible connection, forged in pain and love, that made her brother speak again. Now, seeing the neuroscientist's announcement, Luna felt a chill down her spine. It was as if the past was knocking on her door, asking to be revisited. How many times do we look for solutions in the most obvious places, with the most renowned professionals, the most expensive methods, and forget to look at what's already within us? Dr. Arthur had money, influence, the best contacts in the scientific world. But he didn't have what Luna had. The experience of someone who had crossed through a deafening silence and found, on the other side, a way to communicate that wasn't in any manual. Luna wasn't better than the therapists. She was different. And that difference was exactly what was missing. Because the boy didn't need another diagnosis, another exam, another session where someone tried to extract words from him like pulling a tooth. He needed someone who understood that his silence wasn't a failure. It was a fortress. And to enter a fortress, you don't use a hammer. You use a key. Luna had that key, even without knowing it. She carried within her the experience of someone who had already achieved the impossible once, and that made her dangerously powerful in the eyes of those who only see titles. She watched the announcement video about 10 times without blinking. Each time, she noticed something new. At first, she focused on Dr. Arthur, his rigid posture, the nervous tick of adjusting his glasses whenever emotion threatened to surface. Then she focused on the boy, who appeared for only a few seconds in a photo next to his father. It was that empty look, yet so full of unspoken things, that made Luna remember her brother during his worst days. It was there that something inside her awakened. It wasn't ambition for money, fame, or a chance to appear on television. It was a greater purpose speaking louder. She knew that if she didn't try, she would spend the rest of her life wondering, what if? How many times do we fail to act because fear is greater than desire? Fear of exposing ourselves, of being rejected, of hearing no, of being called intrusive. Luna felt all of that. But she also felt something that weighed more, the certainty that she could make a difference. And when we have that certainty, my friend, fear becomes fuel, not an obstacle. It's as if life is saying, you were prepared for this moment. Now all that's left is to take the first step. The big issue was that Luna knew that if she approached through conventional channels, she would never be taken seriously. She had no resume to send, no letters of recommendation, no diploma to impress Dr. Arthur. If she sent an email saying, "Hi, I'm a street artist. I can help your son," she would be ignored before finishing the sentence. So she needed a different strategy. She needed to create a moment, a situation where the only thing that mattered wasn't her title, but her presence. She needed a turning point to happen even before any conversation. And that's when Luna did something no one expected. Instead of asking for permission to enter, she decided to make herself noticed in a way Dr. Arthur could never ignore. She would use her art as a business card, and she would do it in the place where the scientist felt most secure, his territory, his event, his audience. Luna knew that being right wasn't enough. She needed to be remembered, and to achieve that, she needed to create such a powerful moment that there would be no chance of being forgotten. What did she do? Well, that's what we're about to discover next, because it was exactly at that moment that Luna stopped being a spectator and became the missing piece on the board. While Dr. Arthur was on stage, presenting his research on neuroplasticity to an audience full of scientists, academics, and investors, something unusual was beginning to happen outside the mansion where the event was taking place. Luna didn't try to enter through the front door, didn't ask for credentials, didn't wait to be invited. She knew that if she did that, she would be just another person in line, another resume the pile, another name he would never remember. So she did something only an artist with a restless soul would do. She waited for nightfall, found a blind spot in the garden security, and with a portable projector she carried in her backpack like a treasure, she began to create. On the white garden wall facing the boy's window, Luna projected an animation she had made in the last 48 hours. Without sleeping, without eating properly, driven only by an invisible connection she couldn't yet explain, but already felt pulsing in her chest. The animation was simple, but carried a beauty that hurt. It showed a small astronaut lost in space, floating alone among stars that seemed so close but were light years away. The astronaut wore a helmet that reflected the universe, and inside it, instead of a face, there was a question mark. The mothership, far away, flashlight signals. Flash, pause, flash, pause. It was a code. The astronaut, confused, tried to imitate, but his movements were shaky, hesitant, like someone who had forgotten how to do it. Until, at a certain moment, the mothership sent a different pattern. It was no longer a command, but a heart formed by points of light. And there, in the silence of space, the astronaut finally stopped trying to understand and just felt. That was exactly what Luna wanted to communicate. That sometimes we don't need to understand the message. We need to feel that it was sent. And as a projection danced on the wall, up on the second-floor window, a small figure appeared. The boy, whom we'll call Leo, saw everything. He didn't know what a light projection was, didn't understand digital art, didn't know the concepts Luna had used. But he felt it, and it was the first time in months that Leo felt something other than emptiness. He placed his hand on the cold glass of the window, watching the lost astronaut who insisted on trying to communicate. It was as if the light was speaking directly to him, in a universal language that needed no words, no explanations, no medical reports. It was just a silent question. Are you lost in there too? And for the first time, Leo didn't feel alone in his silence. Someone, somewhere, had built a bridge that didn't require him to speak. Someone had said, without saying a word, that they understood. It was there in that instant that an invisible connection began to be woven. And the most beautiful part was that neither of them knew that this was the beginning of something much bigger. Luna just wanted to be seen. Leo just wanted to be understood. And the universe, with its habit of bringing broken pieces together, was just beginning to work. Let's pause here and reflect on what happened in that garden, because there's a powerful lesson hidden in this scene. How many times do we try to communicate with someone using the language we master, rather than the language the other person understands? Dr. Arthur, with all his intelligence, was trying to reach his son with exams, reports, verbal therapies. But Leo no longer responded to the language of adults. He had retreated to a place where words couldn't reach. And Luna, without knowing it, used the only language that still made sense to him. Light movement, color, visual poetry. It wasn't a technique taught in college. It was pure intuition. It was the wisdom of someone who had learned through pain that sometimes the fastest way to reach someone isn't through the most obvious path, but through the path the person is willing to open. It's like trying to teach a fish to climb a tree. It doesn't matter how good a teacher you are. What works is getting into the water with them. Luna got into the water. She didn't demand that Leo leave his silence. She went there, into his silence, and turned on a light. And here lies one of the greatest secrets of human communication, whether between parents and children, between couples, between friends, or even between you and your own dreams. We spend years trying to be heard, trying to impose our truth, trying to make the other person understand our point of view. And we get frustrated, irritated, rejected. But we forget to ask one simple thing. What language is the other person speaking? Luna knew nothing about Leo's diagnosis, hadn't read the specialist reports, didn't know which therapies had already been tried. But she looked at the situation with the eyes of someone who had nothing to prove, only something to offer. And it was precisely this lightness, this absence of expectation, that allowed magic to happen. Because when we try too hard, we squeeze too tight and end up breaking things. When we offer without demanding, without expecting anything in return, we create space for the other person to feel safe enough to, perhaps, take a step toward us. That's what Luna did. She didn't ask for anything. She just showed she was there. What she didn't expect was that her projection was seen not only by Leo. The mansion security, of course, noticed a strange movement in the garden. Cameras turned toward Luna. Security guard began approaching with crackling radios. The noise caught the attention of some guests who were in the garden during the event's intermission. And within minutes, what had been a silent, anonymous act became the center of attention, but not in the way Luna imagined. Because while the security guard were preparing to approach her, someone more important had already seen the projection. Someone who had been on stage just minutes earlier, talking about synapses and neurotransmitters, but who, upon looking at his son's window and seeing the small figure with a hand on glass, felt something no scientific paper had ever managed to provoke. Dr. Arthur saw his son react. He saw Leo get out of bed and approach the window. He saw in the boy's eyes a spark he thought had been extinguished forever. And it was there, in that moment of shock and hope, that the turning point began to happen. The father who was most concerned with protocols and results saw, with his own eyes, that the answer he had been searching for could come from a place he had never considered. But how would he react when he discovered that the person behind that light was a street artist who had trespassed onto his property? That's what we're about to see next. When the security guard surrounded Luna in the garden, she already had her hands up, the projector turned off, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She was an intruder. She had no bad intentions, but she knew that in the eyes of the law, that's exactly what she looked like. Someone who entered private property without permission, in the middle of the night, projecting images on a billionaire's wall. She was already preparing for the worst, to be expelled, to be detained, to see the dream that had barely begun to grow be crushed before it could take its first step. But what she didn't count on was that Dr. Arthur was already coming down the mansion stairs, ignoring the guests trying to start conversations. His eyes fixed on his son's window. He didn't see the intrusion as a threat. He saw it as a sign. Because for the first time in 6 months, Leo had gotten out of bed on his own. For the first time, Leo had shown genuine interest in something external, and that, for a father who had already lost hope, was worth more than any security protocol. The meeting between them was anything but conventional. Dr. Arthur arrived in the garden with steady steps, but visibly trembling hands. Luna, still with the projector hanging from her shoulder, didn't know whether to apologize, explain, or run. He stared at her for a long moment, and she felt in that gaze not the fury of a powerful man whose property had been violated, but the desperation of a father who had seen a crack of hope and didn't want to let it slip away. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice faltering. Luna answered with the sincerity of someone who had nothing to lose. "I just showed him he's not alone, that there's someone out there trying to communicate, the same way he's trying, even if no one sees it." It was a simple answer, but it resonated somewhere very deep inside that scientist, because he too, amidst so much science and logic, had been trying to communicate with his son in every possible way, and felt that no one saw the silent effort he made every night, sitting by the bedside, waiting for a sign. What happened next was a twist neither Luna nor Dr. Arthur expected. Instead of calling the police, instead of throwing her out with threats and lawsuits, he made an offer. But it wasn't a warm offer full of gratitude. It was a cold, calculated offer, typical of a man accustomed to controlling all the variables in his research. He proposed that Luna become a sensory stimulation consultant for his son's case. She would have access to a mansion, set hours, would have to document every artistic intervention she made, and would have to follow a strict protocol established by the medical team already treating Leo. In return, she would receive a generous salary. Luna listened in silence, processing every word. She was no longer an intruder, but she wasn't a partner either. She was an employee, someone there to perform a specific function within a system she hadn't helped build. And despite everything, she accepted, because deep down, she knew that was the only door that had opened. And sometimes we enter through the door that opens, even if it's not exactly the door we dreamed of. Now, let's dive into this moment with a lens of wisdom, because there's an incredible truth here. How many times do we arrive somewhere with a gift, an intuition, a unique ability, and people want to stuff us into a box they understand? Dr. Arthur didn't know what to do with Luna. He had no category for her in the organizational chart of his life. She wasn't a doctor, wasn't a therapist, wasn't a researcher. So he did what everyone does when they don't understand something. Try to frame, label, limit. He turned a free artist into a protocol consultant. But Luna, even feeling the weight of this constraint, had the wisdom not to refuse. She understood that sometimes we need to accept the invitation that comes, even if it's not perfect, because within it may lie the seeds of what we truly want to build. It's like the story of the young writer who accepts a job as a proofreader, or the musician who starts playing in elevators. It's not the dream stage, but it's a stage. And while you're there, you can show what you know, expand the boundaries of your role, and gradually make the other person realize that you don't fit in the box they created. Luna accepted the rules, but deep down she knew she wouldn't follow them strictly. She knew that art doesn't follow protocol, that nonverbal communication doesn't happen on a schedule, that the invisible connection she had established with Leo couldn't be measured in graphs or documented in reports. But she also knew she needed to earn that father's trust before she could do what truly needed to be done. And trust, my friend, isn't one with arguments. It's one with presence, with consistency, with results. Dr. Arthur didn't believe in her. He believed in the method. And that was okay, because Luna wasn't there to convince anyone with words. She was there to show, day after day, that the path to Leo's heart went through light, color, movement, the silent poetry that only she knew how to create. What Dr. Arthur didn't yet know was that Luna carried a trump card none of the hired specialists had. She had done this before. She had pulled her own brother out of deafening silence using the exact same language. And that secret, kept under lock and key, was the key that could change everything. But for now, she needed to play the game on his terms, at least until the moment the truth came to light. And how would he react when he discovered that the consultant he hired had a connection to the past he never imagined? That's what we're about to see next. Luna's first days at the mansion were a true battlefield, just without shots, explosions, or screams. The war there was silent, fought in impeccably clean hallways and living rooms decorated with the coldness of a luxury catalog. On one side, Luna with her portable projectors, her glow-in-the-dark paints, her out-of-tune guitars she insisted on playing in the corridors. On the other side, Dr. Arthur with his stopwatches, his observation spreadsheets, his weekly meetings with the medical team to evaluate measurable results. It was the meeting of two worlds that seemed to have no common ground. Luna wanted freedom to explore, to make mistakes, to try 100 different ways until she found the one that worked. Dr. Arthur wanted efficiency, data, proof. He didn't have time for trial and error. He had already lost 6 precious months, and each day of silence was a cruel reminder that his son was slipping through his fingers. And in the middle of this tug-of-war, Leo watched everything. The boy said nothing, but his eyes followed every movement, every argument, every gesture of frustration or hope. The first major tension came when Luna suggested something that made the medical team almost have a collective meltdown. She wanted to take Leo out of the mansion, to the streets, to the public spaces where she used to create her artistic interventions. She wanted to show him that art wasn't confined within white walls, that light could dance on graffiti-covered walls, that the universal language she talked about wasn't an abstract concept, but something alive, pulsing on the sidewalks people walk on every day without seeing. Dr. Arthur, of course, reacted with a mix of horror and disbelief. "Take him to the streets?" he repeated, as if she had suggested something absurd, like throwing his son into a wrestling ring. "Do you have any idea of the risk?" He doesn't speak, doesn't communicate, can't ask for help if something happens. And you want to expose him to the chaos of the city? Luna, who had expected this reaction, answered with the calmness of someone who had watched her brother take his first steps outside after years of isolation. He won't need to ask for help, Dr. Arthur. He'll be with me, and I won't let anything happen to him. But what he needs right now isn't more security, it's the world. He's trapped inside himself, and the only way to show him there's something out there worth coming back to is to take him there. That's when Leo's grandmother, a renowned child psychologist who had been closely following the case, stepped in. Until then, she had sided with her son, supporting the scientific approach, suspicious of this artist who appeared out of nowhere with her lights and projections. But something about Luna's argument moved her. Perhaps it was the tone of someone who had done this before, or the memory that in psychology, sometimes the greatest progress happens when you take the patient out of a controlled environment and place them before real life. She didn't immediately declare support for Luna, but asked her son to consider the proposal more calmly. "I'm not saying she's right," the grandmother said, with the measured voice of someone who weighs every word. "But I am saying that so far, everything we've tried within the protocol hasn't worked. Maybe it's time to test something outside the protocol, with supervision, with boundaries, but to test." Dr. Arthur was silent for a long time, processing what, to him, sounded like a defeat for science. But he couldn't deny the obvious. His specialists, his methods, his science hadn't managed to make Leo react. Luna, in just a few days, had already drawn from the boy a spark in his eyes that he thought had been extinguished forever. The clash of methodologies between Luna and Dr. Arthur wasn't just about how to treat Leo. It was about something much deeper. It was about our collective habit of thinking there's one right way to do things, and all other ways are wrong. How many times have we seen this happen? At work, when a boss only accepts ideas that come from the manual, while an employee has a creative solution that breaks the mold. At home, when a father wants to solve his son's problem with scolding and rules, while the mother bets on dialogue and patience. In love, when one wants to plan every step of the relationship, and the other wants to let things happen naturally. No one is completely wrong, but no one is completely right either. What's often missing is the humility to recognize that the other person might have a piece of the puzzle we don't. Dr. Arthur had science, data, protocols. Luna had intuition, practical experience. The sensitivity of someone who had crossed through deafening silence and found the way back. Alone, each had part of the solution. Together, they could have the complete solution. But for that, one of them needed to yield. And who yields first in such a dispute is always whoever has more to lose. Or is it whoever has more to gain? The resolution to this conflict came from a place no one expected. Leo, who until then had been only a silent observer of all these discussions, did something that stopped everyone. In the middle of a tense meeting between Dr. Arthur, his mother, the medical team, and Luna, the boy walked into the room. He wasn't called, didn't ask permission. He simply entered, went to Luna, took her hand, and pointed the window. The gesture was clear. He wanted to go out, not with his father, not with his grandmother, not with the doctors. With her. The silence that followed was so heavy you could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Dr. Arthur looked at his son, at Luna, at the small hand holding hers. And there, in that instant, something broke inside him. It was no longer about who was right, which methodology was superior, who gave orders and who obeyed. It was about a father who, for the first time in months, saw his son express a clear will, a choice, a desire. And he understood that if he wanted Leo to speak again, he needed to start listening to what his son was already saying without words. He looked at Luna with a mix of surrender and hope and made a small gesture with his head. "All right," he said, his voice so low almost no one heard. "All right, take him." It was at that moment that the turning point finally happened. But Luna and Leo's outing into the city was nothing like he imagined, because the moment they walked through the mansion gates, something happened that would forever change the invisible connection between them. And that's exactly what we're about to discover next. Luna and Leo returned from their outing in the late afternoon, and something in the mansion had changed. It wasn't the decoration, wasn't the lighting, wasn't anything physical you could point to. It was the air. The air felt different, lighter, as if someone had opened all the windows after months of closed doors. Leo returned with his eyes shining, in a way no one there had seen in a long time. He hadn't spoken, of course, but he had communicated. For hours, Luna and he walked through the city streets, she pointing out walls where she had projected her works, telling stories of each intervention, showing that art can be born anywhere, even in the most forgotten places. Leo watched her with an attention bordering on fascination, as if he were seeing someone speak a language he always knew existed but had never heard. At one point, in an empty square, Luna took out a projector and, with the twilight light as a backdrop, created a new animation right there, unplanned, without a script. It was a bird trying to fly with a broken wing, but learning to glide with the wind instead of giving up. Leo watched motionless, and when the projection ended, he looked at Luna with an expression she knew well. It was the same look her brother had when he began to emerge from mutism, the look of someone who had found a mirror for their own pain. What Luna didn't know was that while she was out in the city, something was happening inside the mansion. Dr. Arthur, driven by a curiosity bordering on obsession, had ordered his assistant to investigate Luna's past. He wanted to know who this woman was who, in just a few days, had done more for his son than all the specialists he had hired in the last 6 months. It wasn't mistrust, or not just mistrust. It was a desperate need to understand. Because for a man of science, what Luna did didn't make sense within the parameters he knew. She didn't apply protocols, didn't measure results, didn't follow a methodology. And yet it worked. He needed to know where that gift came from. And what the assistant brought made Dr. Arthur sit in his office chair and remain silent for a long time, staring at the wall, seeing nothing. Luna wasn't just a talented street artist. She had a past that explained everything, but also called into question the honesty of her presence there. Her brother, the same one she had briefly mentioned in a casual conversation, wasn't just a former mutism patient. He was a famous science YouTuber with over 2 million followers, and he had just released a series of videos about childhood trauma and alternative communication. The detail that made Dr. Arthur's blood run cold was this. Luna's brother, in one of the videos, told the story of how his sister pulled him out of mutism using exactly the same techniques she was using with Leo. Art, light, projection, silent presence. He called Luna the person who taught me that there are 1,000 ways to say I love you without opening your mouth. So far, nothing unusual. The problem was that the video had been published 3 days before Dr. Arthur's public announcement, and Luna, according to the channel's access data, was one of the first people to watch it. The conclusion Dr. Arthur drew was immediate and brutal. She hadn't appeared by chance. She saw his announcement, recognized the opportunity, and used her brother's story as a trump card to get close. He felt his blood boil. It wasn't the anger of someone who had been invaded. It was the anger of someone who felt manipulated. He, who had spent his entire life studying the human brain, who prided himself on never being fooled, had fallen for an artist who used her own family tragedy as bait. And worse, he had let this woman into his son's life, when the boy's trust become the most important person in Leo's routine. He felt like a fool. When Luna returned from the city with Leo, the reception was completely different. Dr. Arthur waited for her in the entrance hall, arms crossed, his face closed like a steel door. He ordered the nanny to take Leo to his room, and when the two were alone, he exploded. It wasn't an explosion of shouting, it was worse. It was an explosion of cold, measured, surgical words. "You knew," he said, without even forming question. "You saw your brother's video. You knew I was going to make the announcement, and you came here with intention." Luna tried to explain, but her voice got stuck in her throat, because deep down, she couldn't completely deny it. She had seen the announcement. Yes, she had recognized the boy's pain, because she had lived through it with her brother, and she had felt a greater purpose calling her. But the way Dr. Arthur framed it made it seem like she was a con artist, an opportunist, someone who took advantage of a desperate father's vulnerability for money and fame. "You didn't tell me," he continued, his voice trembling with contained anger. "Not once did you tell me you had done this before, that your brother went through exactly what Leo is going through. You hid that from me." Luna lowered her head, because it was true. She hadn't told him, not out of malice, but because she thought it didn't matter, or maybe because she was afraid that if she did, she would be treated exactly as she was being treated now, someone who used their own story for personal gain. The dismissal came quickly. Dr. Arthur said he could no longer trust her, that he didn't know what her real intentions were, that he needed to protect his son from any influence that wasn't completely transparent. Luna listened in silence, gathered her projectors, her paints, her out-of-tune guitar, and left for the back door of the mansion, the same one she had used to enter as an intruder weeks earlier. On the way home, she felt a mix of shame, sadness, and curiously relief, because despite everything, she knew she hadn't done anything wrong. She had come to help, and she had helped, but she also knew Dr. Arthur was right about one thing. She should have told him, not because her brother's story was a weapon, but because it was the most powerful proof that she understood what she was doing. What she couldn't predict was that, inside the mansion, someone wasn't going to accept that dismissal so easily. Someone who had no voice to protest, but had hands to act. And that's exactly what happened. Because while Luna went home with a broken heart, Leo was in his room, and for the first time in 6 months, he wasn't just observing. He was planning, and what he did next no one expected. That's what we're about to talk about now. That night, the mansion was quieter than ever. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of someone who had buried something. Dr. Arthur locked himself in his office, brooding over the discovery he had made, alternating between anger and an uncomfortable guilt he didn't want to admit. Had he been too harsh? Should he have heard her side before making a decision? But every time that doubt appeared, he remembered Luna's brother's video. The publication date, the access data, and the anger returned in full force. He had been manipulated. Period. There was no room for nuance. Meanwhile, upstairs in his room, Leo lay in bed but wasn't sleeping. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, but his mind was working at a speed no one there could imagine. He had seen everything. He saw his father send Luna away, saw the humiliated expression on her face, saw her hands trembling as she gathered her projectors. And for the first time in 6 months, Leo felt something that wasn't sadness, fear, or emptiness. He felt anger. A cold, silent, determined anger. It was the same anger he had felt when his mother left, and no one properly explained why. It was the same anger that had made him close his mouth and never open it again. But now, that anger had a clear target. The injustice done to the only person who truly understood his silence. Leo waited. He waited for his father's footsteps to go up the stairs and disappeared down the hallway. He waited for the hallway light to go out. He waited for the sound of his father's bedroom door closing. And then, with the discretion of someone who had spent months learning to be invisible, he got out of bed. His bare feet touched the cold floor without making a sound. He knew exactly where everything was. He knew that the projector Luna had used was stored in his father's office closet because he had seen his father put there days ago, like someone storing a dangerous tool they didn't know how to use. He knew his father's computer password was his mother's birthday because he had watched his father type it 1,000 times. He knew his father had an important meeting the next day with investors and partners because he had overheard the conversation during dinner. Leo didn't speak, but he heard everything. And in the last 6 months, he had heard more than anyone could imagine. He heard discussions about his future, heard doctors giving diagnoses that sounded like sentences, heard his father crying alone in the office late at night. He knew everything. And now, for the first time, he was going to use that knowledge. He went down the stairs like a little ghost, opened the office door that his father, in the fury of the day, had forgotten to lock. There was a projector, exactly where he remembered. There was a computer, still on, because his father had left in a hurry after the argument. Leo turned on the projector, connected it to the computer with hands trembling with anxiety, but steady with purpose. He didn't know how to use all the tools, but he knew enough. He had watched Luna operate that equipment so many times, he had memorized every button, every cable, every adjustment. It was as if, without saying a word, she had taught him everything. He opened the folder where he knew his father kept the security camera videos. He searched, until he found it. The video from the first night, when Luna projected the lost astronaut on the garden wall. He clicked play, adjusted the projector's focus, aimed it at the office wall, right behind the table where his father would have the meeting the next day. And then, with his heart beating so hard it felt like it would jump out his chest, he pressed play. The image of the lonely astronaut floating in space began to dance on the wall again. lights flashing in code, the mothership trying to communicate. Leo watched for a moment, and then, with a gesture he had learned from watching Luna, he made a small modification to the image. He added a star shining next to the astronaut. Someone there, not alone. The next morning, Dr. Arthur entered his office for the most important meeting in months. Investors, partners, the entire company leadership was there, seated at the glass table, waiting for him to present the results of the new research line. He was nervous, his head still full of the previous day's events, but he knew he needed to focus. The meeting began. He pulled up the graphs on the computer, started talking about synapses and neuroplasticity, about the advances his team had made. And then someone pointed to the wall behind him. "Dr. Arthur, what is that?" He turned around, and the world stopped, projected on the white wall of his office, in soft lights that danced like will-o'-the-wisps, was the image of a small astronaut lost in space. And beside him, a star. It wasn't a graph, wasn't data, wasn't a slide from the presentation. It was his son's voice. For the first time in 6 months, Leo was saying something. And he wasn't saying it with his mouth. He was saying it with light, with image, with the only universal language that still made sense to him. The silence in the room was so absolute you could hear the projector humming. Dr. Arthur couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. He looked at the image, then at the confused investors, then at the image again. And there, in front of everyone, without any protocol, without any specialist, without any graph, he understood. He understood that Luna was an opportunist. He understood that Leo didn't need a cure. He needed a voice. And he, the great scientist, the man who had studied the human brain for decades, had been the blindest of all. The meeting was canceled, of course, but something much bigger was about to begin. And this time, it wouldn't be him dictating the rules. It would be Leo. And the first step? Go after Luna and apologize. How would he do that after everything he had said? That's what we're about to discover next. Dr. Arthur stood in his office for a long time after all the investors had left. The room was empty, the projector still on, the image of the astronaut and the stars still dancing on the wall like a ghost that refused to disappear. He looked at that projection and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. Not the shame of being exposed in front of his partners. Not the shame of canceling the most important meeting of the year. It was a much deeper shame, coming from a place he didn't even know still existed inside him. It was a shame of a father who, in his desperation to fix his son, forgot to listen to him. It was a shame of a man who spent his entire life believing that truth lay in data, graphs, scientific publications, and who refused to see the truth that was right in front of him, projected on the wall of his own office. He looked at the star Leo had added to the image and remembered a night many years ago when his wife was still alive. They were in the garden, looking at the sky, and she said something he never forgot. "You know, Arthur, sometimes we spend so much time trying to understand the stars with formulas and telescopes that we forget to simply look at them and feel awe." At the time, he laughed, found it poetic but with no practical application. Now, those words echoed in his head like a verdict. He went up the stairs slowly, like someone going to meet something they fear, but know they can no longer postpone. Leo was in his room, sitting on the bed, his eyes fixed on the window. He hadn't run away, hadn't hidden what he did. He knew his father would find out, and he was there, waiting. Dr. Arthur entered, sat beside his son, and for the first time in 6 months, he didn't try to say anything. He didn't try to explain, didn't try to justify, didn't try to fix. He just sat there in silence, looking at the same window his son was looking at. And in that shared silence, something extraordinary happened. Leo, without taking his eyes off the window, reached out and touched his father's hand. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness, wasn't a gesture of acceptance. It was a gesture of presence. It was as if he was saying, "I'm still here. Even after everything, I'm still here." Dr. Arthur felt tears come with force he couldn't control. He cried like he hadn't cried since his wife's funeral. He cried for everything he had done wrong, for all the nights he spent in the lab instead of being home, for all the specialists he put in front of his son thinking they had the answer, for all the times he tried to extract words from Leo like pulling a tooth. It was in this moment of collapse that the turning point finally happened for Dr. Arthur. He understood that this wasn't about who was right or wrong in the argument with Luna. It was about something much simpler and much harder at the same time. It was about learning to listen. He had spent 6 months trying to make his son speak, but never stopped to ask himself if he was speaking a language his son understood. Leo didn't need more words. He needed someone who could endure the silence with him. Luna knew that. She had learned it from her brother. And he, with all the scientific knowledge in the world, hadn't been able to see the obvious. The emotional healing he had been seeking for his son wasn't a Nature article, wasn't a Swiss protocol, wasn't an experimental medication. It was in a simple gesture, sitting next to someone who is suffering and not trying to rush their pain. It was in a light projected on a wall, saying, "You are not alone." It was in a star added to an image by a boy who didn't speak, but had so much to say. Dr. Arthur picked up the phone and called Luna. She answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting. The conversation was short, but each word weighed tons. "I was wrong," he said. He didn't apologize with excuses, didn't try to justify himself. "I was wrong. You didn't deserve what I did, and I need you to come back." On the other end of the line, Luna was silent for a moment. She had spent the entire previous day brooding over the humiliation, wondering if she had done the right thing by approaching, if she should have told him about her brother from the beginning. But now, hearing that man's voice crumble, she felt that something had changed. It was no longer the arrogant scientist who confronted her in the mansion's hallway. It was a broken father, asking for help. "I'll come back," she said, "but not as an employee, and not as a protocol consultant. I'll come back as a partner, and we're going to do it the way Leo needs it, not the way we think is right." Dr. Arthur agreed without hesitation. He had learned the hardest lesson of his life, that sometimes the greatest act of intelligence is recognizing one's own ignorance. The next day, Luna returned to the mansion, but she didn't enter through the back door, wasn't received with suspicion, didn't have to follow absurd protocols. This time, Dr. Arthur was waiting for her at the front door, with Leo beside him. The boy, upon seeing Luna, did something no one would ever forget. He smiled. It wasn't a wide smile, wasn't a smile of a child jumping with joy. It was a small, shy smile, but unmistakable. It was a smile of someone who had found a friend in the midst of chaos. Luna knelt in front of him, looked into the boy's eyes, and made a sign with her hands that she had taught her brother years ago. It was a sign for family. Leo, without hesitation, repeated the sign back. Dr. Arthur watched it all in silence, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel fear of the future. He felt hope, but he knew the journey was just beginning. Now, with Luna back, with a new alliance formed, they needed to build something that had never been attempted before. A communication system that united art and science, intuition and data, freedom and structure. How would that be possible? That was a challenge awaiting them, and they were ready to face it. That's what we're about to talk about now. The Montero mansion was never the same after that day. Not because the decoration changed, not because new furniture arrived, but because the spirit of the place had transformed. What was once a mausoleum of silence and protocol had now become a studio laboratory, a space where art and science finally met to dance together. Dr. Arthur had the imposing office he was so proud of dismantled, with its glass table and noble with bookshelves. In its place, he installed a simple white plastic table, surrounded by screens, sensors, cameras, and at the center, Luna's projector, which had once been treated as a dangerous tool. Now, it was the beating heart of that space. The library of scientific articles began sharing space with art books, sketchbooks, glow-in-the-dark paints, and small guitars scattered in the corners. The house, which had once seemed like a museum where no one could touch anything, was now alive, messy, full of colors and sounds. And in the middle of it all, Luna's brother, the famous science YouTuber, arrived with his augmented reality equipment, motion sensors, and contagious energy. The project of the three, Dr. Arthur, Luna, and her brother, whom we'll call Miguel, were about to build was something that didn't exist anywhere in the world. It wasn't just therapy, wasn't just an artistic intervention, wasn't just a technological experiment. It was a new universal language, a hybrid communication system that united the best of three worlds. Luna's artistic sensitivity, Dr. Arthur's scientific precision, and Miguel's technological innovation. The idea was simple in essence but complex in execution. They would capture the sign language signs Luna was teaching Leo. Because yes, Leo was learning sign language quickly and transform them in real time into artistic projections and sounds. Each movement of the boy's hands would become light, color, form, music. Each gesture, no matter how timid, would come to life on the wall, the ceiling, the floor. It was like giving Leo a voice that didn't depend on vocal cords but was equally powerful. Perhaps even more so, because that voice came from his hands, his entire body, an expression he could finally control. The first week of work was organized chaos. Miguel installed motion sensors throughout Leo's room, capable of capturing even the subtlest gestures. Luna created a repertoire of images: stars, birds, ocean waves, blooming flowers, each associated with a specific sign language sign. Dr. Arthur, who until then barely knew how to turn on a computer, learned to program the algorithms that translated movements into projections. It was as if he was rediscovering science, not as a territory of cold formulas, but as a field of infinite possibilities. And Leo, at the center of it all, watched this transformation with eyes that shone brighter each day. He didn't speak, but he communicated constantly. When he wanted water, he made the sign, and a water droplet made of light materialized on the wall. When he missed his mother, he made the heart sign, and small red hearts flowed across the ceiling like balloons. With each sign, each projection, Leo was occupying a space that had once been empty. He was finally finding an invisible connection with the world. What was most impressive was that the transformation didn't happen only with Leo. Dr. Arthur, the scientist who had spent decades trusting only what could be measured, began to allow himself to feel. He learned sign language alongside his son and discovered that this universal language was much richer than he had imagined. It wasn't a substitute for speech. It was a complement. It was a way to say things that words alone couldn't express. He learned the sign for gratitude and used it with Luna at the end of a long workday. She responded with a sign for family, and he felt a lump in his throat. For the first time, he understood what his wife had tried to say that night in the garden. Life isn't just about understanding. Sometimes it's about feeling. And Luna, who had come to help Leo, discovered she was being helped too, working with that family, seeing her brother Miguel so present, watching Dr. Arthur shed his arrogance, watching Leo flourish each day. All of this began to heal wounds she didn't even know were still open. The loss of her mother, her brother's illness, years of struggling alone. All of it was beginning to make sense, not as a planned path, but as a route that revealed itself gradually, like a star that only appears when you stop searching and start looking. At the end of the second week, something magical happened. Leo, who until then had only used signs in isolation, made his first complete sentence in sign language. He looked at Luna, at his father, at Miguel, and moved his hands in a sequence they had taught him together. The sensor captured it, the algorithm processed it, and on the ceiling of the room, a constellation formed. It wasn't random stars. It was a constellation Luna had created on the first night, when she projected the lost astronaut. But now, the constellation was complete. One star was missing. Leo pointed to the imaginary sky, then pointed to himself, then made the sign for here. What he was saying, with light, with color, with the language he himself had helped build, was simple and profound. I am here. I have always been here. You just didn't know how to look. Dr. Arthur fell to his knees, embraced his son, and for the first time he didn't feel his wife's absence as an emptiness, but as a silent presence that united them. Luna and Miguel looked at each other, and in their eyes was the same certainty. They had found their place in the world. But the journey wasn't over yet, because now, with Leo communicating freely in sign language, the moment everyone had been waiting for, but no one wanted to force, had arrived, the first spoken word. The inclusive art exhibition at the city's museum was scheduled for a sunny Saturday, 3 weeks after the constellation had formed on the ceiling of Leo's room. It wasn't just any event. It was the first time the work of the three, Luna, Dr. Arthur, and Miguel, would be presented to the public. An exhibition that united art, technology, and alternative communication, with the goal of showing that there are 1,000 ways to say what you feel without opening your mouth. The museum, which normally hosted traditional exhibitions, paintings on canvas and sculptures on pedestals, was transformed. The walls were living canvases, where projections danced to the rhythm of visitors. Motion sensors captured visitors' gestures and transformed them into shapes, colors, lights. It was as if the entire museum had come to life, as if art were no longer confined to frames but pulsed in the air, waiting to be touched. And at the center of it all was a special room. A room where the masterpiece wasn't a painting or a sculpture, but a child. Leo was there not as a visitor, not as an observer, but as a co-creator. He would use the system they had developed to communicate with the public, showing that silence isn't the absence of voice, but a different way of speaking. The days leading up to the exhibition were a mix of euphoria and nervousness. Dr. Arthur, who had never cared about public opinion, was now anxious as a boy on the eve of an exam. What if the public didn't understand? What if they thought it was a senseless extravagance? What if, worse, they thought he was exploiting his own family tragedy to promote his company's image? Luna, who was used to being invisible, now found herself at the center of attention and didn't quite know how to handle it. Miguel, the YouTuber brother, was in his element, but even he recognized that this moment was bigger than any video he had ever made. And Leo, the boy who didn't speak, was the only one who seemed at peace. He spent the morning of the exhibition sitting on the floor of the special room, arranging small color projectors in a perfect line, like someone arranging brushes before painting a canvas. He showed no fear, no anxiety. He was just there, present, ready for whatever came. And this calmness, coming from someone who had spent 6 months trapped in his own deafening silence, was more of a teaching than any self-help book could offer. The exhibition opening was a greater success than anyone had expected. The museum was packed, not only with the city's cultural elite, but with families, children, curious people who had seen the promotion on social media and wanted to understand what this communication through light was all about. In the main room, Miguel gave a presentation about the technology they had developed, explaining how the sensors captured gestures and transformed them into projections. Dr. Arthur, in a corner, watched everything with a mix of pride and humility. He was no longer the center of attention, and for the first time, that didn't bother him. He was there to support, not to lead. And Luna, in the middle of the crowd, was constantly approached by people who wanted to know more about her art, about how she had started, about her brother, about the journey that had brought her there. She told her story with the simplicity of someone who doesn't seek fame, but wants to share what she has learned. And amidst so many people, so much noise, so much light, Leo was in a special room, alone with the projectors, waiting for the right moment. The right moment came when Luna entered the room, followed by Dr. Arthur, Miguel, and a small group of visitors who had been invited to witness something no one there would ever forget. Leo looked at them and without hesitation began to communicate. His hands moved in the air, the sensors captured each gesture, and on the ceiling of the room, a story began to unfold. It was the story of the lost astronaut, the one Luna had projected that first night in the garden. But now, the story had a new chapter. The astronaut, after so long alone, found other astronauts. They didn't speak the same language, but they learned to communicate with light, with gestures, with the patience of those who know that true invisible connection doesn't need words. The projection was beautiful, complex, charged with emotion. But what no one expected was that when the story ended, Leo didn't stop. He continued with his hands in the air, the sensors capturing his movements, and on the ceiling, a new image began to form. It wasn't an astronaut, wasn't a star, wasn't an abstract symbol. It was a word, formed by points of light, shining on the ceiling like a newly discovered constellation. The word was Dad. Dr. Arthur didn't hear anything, but he saw. He saw his son's voice for the first time in 6 months, not with his ears, but with his eyes. He saw each letter form, each point of light dance in the air, each gesture of the boy who, without opening his mouth, had just said the most important thing in the world. The silence in the room was absolute. No one moved, no one breathed, until Luna, her voice faltering with emotion, translated into words what Leo had just projected. He said, "Dad." He's calling for his father. Dr. Arthur fell to his knees on the floor of the room, embraced Leo, and cried. They weren't tears of sadness, weren't tears of despair. They were tears of someone who, after a long journey through the desert, finally finds an oasis. They were tears of someone who understands that love doesn't need words to be felt, but that when words come, they have the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Leo, in his father's arms, smiled, and with his hands, he made the sign for love, which Luna had taught him weeks earlier. Dr. Arthur repeated the sign back, and there, in the middle of an art exhibition, surrounded by strangers who had become witnesses to a silent miracle, father and son were reunited. But the story didn't end there, because now, with Leo speaking with his hands and beginning to use his voice, a new question arose for Luna. Had she fulfilled her mission, or was her place now there, beside them, building something greater? It was a dilemma that awaited her, and it was more frightening than any projection of light. That's what we're about to talk about now. The success of the exhibition was resounding. The press, which had previously treated Dr. Arthur as an eccentric billionaire willing to do anything for his son, now portrayed him as a visionary, someone who had found an innovative path for human communication. The articles talk about the technology developed by Miguel, Luna's artistic sensitivity, Leo's courage. But what no article could capture was what happened inside the mansion after the cameras left, after the flashes went out, after the outside world returned to its routine. It was there in the silence of the nights that the true transformation happened. Leo, who used to spend nights in sepulchral silence, now laughed. It wasn't a loud, boisterous laugh, but a soft, almost shy laugh that escaped when Luna made funny faces with her hands during sign language lessons, or when his father tried to imitate the signs and mixed everything up, accidentally turning love into pineapple. It was a laugh that warmed the entire house, that made even the staff smile from a distance. And it was on one of those nights, after a light dinner where Leo ate pasta with his hands and laughed because Luna purposely got a bit of sauce on her nose, that something unexpected happened. Dr. Arthur and Luna were sitting on the living room sofa, talking quietly while Miguel showed Leo a new app on the tablet. The boy, bored with the technology, picked up his small wrist projector, a reduced version Miguel had created for him, and began playing alone on the living room floor. He projected small images on the ceiling, stars, hearts, flowers, until, at a certain moment, the projection changed. Leo began drawing the air with his fingers, guided by an inspiration that seemed to come from somewhere very deep inside him. On the ceiling, slowly, a constellation began to form. It wasn't just any constellation. It was a map of stars representing people. One large, bright star at the center, that was his mother. A medium star, slightly dimmer beside it, that was his father. A small but intense star near the large one, that was him. Dr. Arthur and Luna stopped talking and watched, hypnotized. Leo continued projecting. A new star began to appear. It wasn't large, wasn't small. It was medium, but shone with a different light, as if it had a color the others didn't. It positioned itself next to the father's star, not in the mother's place, but beside it, completing it. Leo looked at Luna, then at his father, then back at the projection, and with a gesture he himself created on the spot, he made the new star blink 3 times. Blink, blink, blink. It was a code. It was a question. The silence in the room was so thick, you could hear the projector humming. Luna didn't know what to say. Dr. Arthur didn't know what to say. But Leo, the boy who didn't speak, had just made the clearest, most beautiful, most profound request any word could express. He was asking if Luna could stay. Not as a teacher, not as an artist, not as a friend, as part of the constellation. The success of the exhibition was resounding. The press, which had previously treated Dr. Arthur as an eccentric billionaire willing to do anything for his son, now portrayed him as a visionary, someone who had found an innovative path for human communication. The articles talk about the technology developed by Miguel, Luna's artistic sensitivity, Leo's courage. But what no article could capture was what happened inside the mansion after the cameras left, after the flashes went out, after the outside world returned to its routine. It was there, in the silence of the nights, that the true transformation happened. Leo, who used to spend nights in sepulchral silence, now laughed. It wasn't a loud, boisterous laugh, but a soft, almost shy laugh that escaped when Luna made funny faces with her hands during sign language lessons, or when his father tried to imitate the signs and mixed everything up, accidentally turning love into pineapple. It was a laugh that warmed the entire house, that made even the staff smile from a distance. And it was on one of those nights, after a light dinner where Leo ate pasta with his hands and laughed, because Luna purposely got a bit of sauce on her nose, that something unexpected happened. Dr. Arthur and Luna were sitting on the living room sofa, talking quietly while Miguel showed Leo a new app on the tablet. The boy, bored with the technology, picked up his small wrist projector, a reduced version Miguel had created for him, and began playing alone on the living room floor. He projected small images on the ceiling, stars, hearts, flowers, until, at a certain moment, the projection changed. Leo began drawing in the air with his fingers, guided by an inspiration that seemed to come from somewhere very deep inside him. On the ceiling, slowly, a constellation began to form. It wasn't just any constellation. It was a map of stars representing people. One large, bright star at the center. That was his mother. A medium star, slightly dimmer, beside it. That was his father. A small but intense star near the large one. That was him. Dr. Arthur and Luna stopped talking and watched, hypnotized. Leo continued projecting. A new star began to appear. It wasn't large, wasn't small. It was medium, but shone with a different light, as if it had a color the others didn't. It positioned itself next to the father's star, not in the mother's place, but beside it, completing it. Leo looked at Luna, then at his father, then back at the projection, and with a gesture he himself created on the spot, he made the new star blink 3 times. Blink, blink, blink. It was a code. It was a question. The silence in the room was so thick, you could hear the projector humming. Luna didn't know what to say. Dr. Arthur didn't know what to say. But Leo, the boy who didn't speak, had just made the clearest, most beautiful, most profound request any word could express. He was asking if Luna could stay. Not as a teacher, not as an artist, not as a friend, as part of the constellation. Leo didn't wait any longer. He dropped the projector, ran, and threw himself into Luna's arms, who hugged him tight, feeling warm tears streaming down her face. Dr. Arthur approached, and for the first time, the 3 were embraced, not as patient, therapist, and father, not as artist, client, and sponsor, not as strangers united by circumstance. They were embraced as family, a family that hadn't been planned, that followed no manual, that had been forged in pain, in silence, in overcoming, but that now, on that night, under a constellation projected by a boy who had learned to speak with his hands before speaking with his mouth, was complete. It wasn't the family Dr. Arthur had imagined when he married Christina. It wasn't the family Luna had imagined when she lost her mother and cared for her brother. It wasn't the family Leo used to draw in his notebooks when his mother was still alive. It was a different family. And perhaps, for that very reason, it was stronger, because it hadn't been built on expectations, but on choices, on the choice to stay, even when everything seemed lost, on the choice to forgive, even when anger seemed more justified, on the choice to love, even when the fear of loss tightened in the chest. But like every family, theirs would also have its challenges, because Luna, who had found a home, also had a career, and her career, which had once been just a distant dream, was now knocking at the door with force. Exhibitions, invitations, partnership proposals, everything she had ever wanted, but which now, ironically, threatened to take her away from the very place she most wanted to be. How to reconcile her newly discovered love with the art that defined her? That was a dilemma looming on the horizon, and it wouldn't be easy to resolve. That's what we're about to talk about now. What Luna had always wanted was finally happening, and that was, paradoxically, what kept her awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling of the room that was now hers in the mansion as well. The success of the exhibition opened doors she didn't even know existed. Art galleries in Sao Paulo, Rio, and even abroad were inviting her to exhibit her work. Renowned artists wanted to collaborate with her. Specialized magazines requested interviews. It was everything she had dreamed of when she started projecting light onto the forgotten walls of the city, when no one saw her, when she was just that crazy woman drawing with light on abandoned walls. But now that the spotlight was on her, now that the world finally recognized her talent, Luna felt more lost than ever, because each invitation that arrived was also a choice. Each exhibition in another city meant days away from Leo. Each international project meant weeks away from Dr. Arthur. And she, who had spent her whole life fighting to be seen, was discovering that the price of visibility could be distance from those she loved. Luna's internal conflict was so deep she couldn't even talk about it. How could she complain about success? How could she say she was unhappy when everything she had ever wanted was materializing before her eyes? She felt ungrateful, spoiled, confused. During the day, she answered emails, responded to invitations, attended meetings with art curators. But at night, when Leo was already asleep and Dr. Arthur was reviewing his articles in the office, Luna would lock herself in her room and look at her own hands. The same hands that once projected light onto walls to save her brother. The same hands that taught Leo to communicate in sign language. The same hands that now received awards and recognition. And it was precisely this contrast that frightened her. She was afraid that by embracing the career she had always wanted, she would be abandoning the invisible connection that had brought her here. She was afraid that the famous artist would kill the anonymous artist who knew how to listen to silence. She was afraid that on the path to success, she would lose the only thing that truly mattered. The ability to communicate with those who needed it most. The worst part was that Luna didn't feel comfortable sharing this fear with anyone. With Dr. Arthur, she didn't want to seem weak or indecisive. He, who had rebuilt his life after a devastating loss, who had set aside his own pride to learn a new way to communicate, who had transformed the mansion into a studio laboratory to support her work. How could she tell him she was considering leaving it all behind for a professional opportunity? With Miguel, her brother who so admired her work, she didn't want to seem like she was dismissing the success he had helped her build. And with Leo, well, that was unthinkable. How could she explain to a boy who had learned to speak with his hands, because of her, that she needed to be away for weeks, maybe months? So Luna did what most of us do when we're lost. She smiled, said everything was fine, and kept the anguish to herself. But anguish, when kept too long, begins to rot from within. And Luna felt that if she didn't make a decision soon, what she loved most in life would begin to unravel. How many times have we been through this? That dilemma of having to choose between what we love to do and what we love to live, between the career that fulfills us and the people who complete us? The truth is that life loves to put us at these crossroads. And there's no right answer, no magic formula. What exists is the courage to look inside and ask, what really matters? Luna spent days asking herself this question. She listed pros and cons, thought about the future, imagined scenarios, but none of it brought peace, because deep down, she already knew the answer. She just didn't have the courage to admit it. And it was precisely when she was at the bottom of this anguish, lost between what she wanted and what she feared losing, that Miguel appeared. He, who had gone through the same thing years ago, when YouTube fame began knocking at the door and he needed to choose between success and family. He knew exactly what Luna was feeling, and he had something to say. Something she didn't expect to hear, but urgently needed to. What did Miguel say to Luna? That's what we're about to discover now. Miguel found Luna in the garden, sitting on the same bench where Dr. Arthur had called her to talk weeks earlier, when everything was still uncertain. Her eyes were red, her hands in her lap, her projectors turned off beside her. She didn't need to say anything. Miguel knew that expression. It was the same one she had when he was a teenager and spent days without speaking, locked in his room, lost in his own deafening silence. Back then, Luna had been the bridge. Now it was his turn. He sat beside her, unhurried, without judgment. He was silent for a long time, just present. And it was in that shared silence, in that invisible connection that only those who have gone through trauma together know how to have, that Luna finally opened her heart. I don't know what to do, Miguel. They want me in Paris, New York, Tokyo. Galleries, exhibitions, projects. It's everything I've ever wanted. But every time I think about going, I feel a knot in my stomach. It's as if, by saying yes to the world, I'm saying no to them. To Leo, to Arthur, to us. Her voice faltered on the last word. Miguel listened in silence, without interrupting, without offering immediate solutions. He knew Luna didn't need advice, at least not yet. She needed to be heard. So he waited for crying to pass, waited for her breathing to return to normal, waited for the silence to settle between them again. And only then, with the calm of someone who had been exactly where she was, did he speak. Do you remember when I was 14 and stopped speaking? You'd come to my room every night, sit on the floor, and start drawing with light on the wall. You didn't try to make me speak, didn't ask what I was feeling, didn't pressure me. You just drew, and I watched, until one day, without planning, without forcing, I took the projector from your hand and started drawing too. Luna remembered. It was one of her most precious memories. You know what made me come out of the silence? Miguel continued. It wasn't the art. It wasn't the light. It was you. It was you being there every night, asking for nothing in return. It was you showing me I wasn't alone. He paused, letting the words echo in the air. And now you're doing the same thing with Leo, and with Arthur, and with the world. Through your art, you're showing people that there are other ways to communicate, other ways to connect, other ways to love. And that, Luna, isn't something you abandon when you get on a plane to Paris. That's something you carry with you wherever you go. Luna looked at him, confused. But how? How can I be present for Leo if I'm on the other side of the world? How can I build a family with Arthur if I'm traveling all the time? Miguel smiled, that smile he had as a child when he discovered something new. Do you think family is just about being under the same roof? Do you think love is measured in hours per day? Look at us. You spent years traveling, working, building your career, and I never stopped loving you. I never stopped knowing you were there for me, because what unites us isn't distance. It's choice. It's a choice to keep caring, even from afar. It's a choice to be part of it, even when you're not physically present. Luna felt something loosen inside her. It was as if a knot she had been carrying for weeks, maybe years, was finally beginning to unravel. But what if I lose what I built here? She asked, her voice still trembling. What if, when I come back, things aren't the same anymore? Miguel took her hand, a gesture he hadn't made since adolescence. Luna, what you've built here isn't a sandcastle that crumbles with the wind. It's a tree. And a tree doesn't die because the gardener travels. It keeps growing firm-rooted. You planted something very strong in that house, in that boy, in that man. And that won't disappear because you're going after your dreams. Quite the opposite. Perhaps by achieving your dreams, you'll show them that it's possible to love and to fly at the same time. That you don't have to choose between being an artist and being family. You can be both. You can be more. Miguel's words hung in the air like the lights Luna used to project on walls. She looked at the mansion, at Leo's window, at the office where Dr. Arthur worked. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel the weight of an impossible choice. She felt the lightness of a decision that hadn't yet been made, but no longer frightened her. And you? She asked, shifting her gaze from her brother to the garden. How did you do it? When YouTube exploded and everyone wanted a piece of you, how did you choose? Miguel laughed, that warm laugh that always diffused any tension. I didn't choose, Luna. I learned to dance. I learned that you can make incredible videos without needing to be everywhere at once. I learned that you can build a successful career without abandoning those you love. And more importantly, I learned that when you try to hold on too tightly, you crush. When you open your hands, you embrace. He stood up, extended his hand to his sister. Come, there's someone inside who wants to talk to you, and this time it won't be with his hands. Luna's eyes widened. Leo, is he going to speak? Miguel didn't answer. He just smiled, and that bridge Luna had built to save her brother years ago now transformed into a new bridge, one that would lead her back inside, to the encounter that would change everything. What did Leo have to say, finally with the voice that had been kept silent for so long? That's what we're about to discover now. When Luna entered the mansion after a conversation with Miguel, what she found wasn't a planned scene, nor a rehearsed speech, nor a traditional marriage proposal with kneeling and a velvet box. She found something much simpler and much more powerful. Leo sitting on the living room floor with a piece of paper in front of him, and Dr. Arthur beside him, both silent, both with expressions she couldn't decipher. Leo, upon seeing Luna, picked up the paper and handed it to her. It was a drawing, not just any drawing. It was the same drawing he had made that night, when he projected the constellation on the ceiling, asking her to stay. But now the drawing had something new. In the center, the large star of his mother still shone. The medium star of his father was still there. His own small star was there too. And the new star, representing Luna, remained beside the father. But now, above all of them, there was a line he had drawn with a golden pencil Luna didn't even know existed in the house. It was a circle that surrounded all the stars. And inside the circle, Leo had written one word, a single word, Institute. Luna looked at the drawing, confused. Institute? She asked, raising her eyes to Dr. Arthur. He smiled, a smile different from any she had seen before. It wasn't the smile of a scientist who had just published an important paper. It wasn't the smile of a father who had seen his son speak for the first time. It was a smile of someone who had spent sleepless nights thinking about how to build a future that made sense for everyone. I had an idea, he began, his voice still a little hesitant, as if presenting a project he knew was risky but believed in with all his heart. I don't want to ask you to marry me, Luna, at least not in the traditional way. I don't want you to be the millionaire's wife or Leo's stepmother. You're so much more than that. You're an artist, and the world needs your art. So I want to propose something else. He paused as if gathering courage. Let's create an institute, the Luna and Christina Institute, a space that unites art, science, and alternative communication for children who have lost their voice, whether through trauma or condition. You'll be the creative director. You'll travel, exhibit, create your art, and at the same time, you'll build a foundation here, a place where everything we learn with Leo can help other families. Luna felt her eyes fill with tears. They weren't tears of sadness, weren't tears of joy. They were tears of recognition. Dr. Arthur wasn't trying to trap her, wasn't trying to limit her, wasn't asking her to choose between art and family. He was creating a path where both could coexist, where she could fly and, at the same time, have roots, where love wasn't a cage but an open field to flourish. The name, she managed to say, her voice faltering. Why her name, too? Dr. Arthur looked at Leo's drawing, at the large star in the center, because she will never stop being part of this, because what we're building here is a bridge between what she dreamed and what we're living, and because I want you to know that I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm trying to honor what is past and, at the same time, build something new with you, if you want. Leo, who had been watching everything in silence until then, couldn't take it anymore. He raised his hands and began signing frantically. Luna and Dr. Arthur watched, eyes wide, as the boy made a complete sentence in sign language, the longest he had ever made. Mom, happy. Dad, happy. Luna, happy. Me, happy. Institute, all children, happy. You, except Dr. Arthur translated for Luna. Even though he knew she had already understood, it was a request, not a marriage proposal, not a dating request, not a traditional commitment request. It was a child's request. Someone who, after losing his voice and finding it again, wanted the person who had helped him on that journey to officially become part of the story. Luna knelt in front of Leo, looked into his eyes, and responded with both voice and hands at the same time. Yes, I accept. I accept being part of your family. I accept building this institute with you. I accept flying and coming back. I accept being happy. I accept. Leo smiled. It was the widest smile he had ever given in his life. And then, without warning, without planning, without anyone expecting it, he opened his mouth. Family, he said. The voice came out rough, strange, like someone using a muscle that had been idle for too long. But it was his voice. It was the first word Leo had spoken in over 6 months, and it wasn't water, wasn't dad, wasn't thank you. It was family. Dr. Arthur broke down in tears. Luna held both of them in her lap, laughing and crying at the same time. And Leo, the boy who had once been lost in deafening silence, repeated the word, as if experiencing the sound for the first time. Family, family, family. Each repetition was clearer, stronger, more full of life. Outside in the garden, Miguel watched through the window, eyes misty. He thought of all the nights Luna had spent in his room, drawing with light on the wall, waiting for him to find his voice. Now, she had found hers, and she had helped someone else find theirs. The bridge was complete. But the story still had one final chapter, because the true proof that this family was ready for the world would come years later, on a stage, in front of an audience. And that, my friends, is the scene we're saving for the end. That's what we're about to talk about now. The museum auditorium was packed. It wasn't the same room as the first exhibition years ago. It was a much larger space, with capacity for 1,000 people, and still there was a line outside. People who couldn't get a seat watching on giant screens set up in the square. The Luna and Christina Institute, which began as a dream drawn by a 5-year-old boy on a piece of paper, was now a world reference in alternative communication. It had already helped hundreds of children find their voice, whether with their hands, with light, with technology, or with spoken words. And that night, the Institute was celebrating its 5th anniversary with an event that promised to be unforgettable. On stage, an enormous screen stood dark, waiting. On the sides, state-of-the-art projectors, much more powerful than the small portable equipment Luna had carried in her backpack that first night in the garden. But the spirit was the same. The invisible connection was still there, pulsing, waiting to manifest. When the lights went out and silence filled the auditorium, a boy walked onto the stage. He was no longer a small child, the kind who wears superhero pajamas and holds wooden toys. He was a 10-year-old adolescent, tall for his age, with lively eyes and a smile that lit up his face. Leo wore a dark blue suit he had chosen himself, after hours of indecision at the mall with Luna and his father. On his left wrist, a small projector, an even more advanced version of what Miguel had created years ago, capable of transforming any gesture into light, color, and form in real time. Leo wasn't nervous. He had rehearsed that moment hundreds of times in his room, in the living room, in the garden. He knew exactly what he was going to do, but what he didn't know was that nothing, ever, compares to the real moment. He looked at the audience, saw the 1,000 faces illuminated by the soft side lights, and felt a flutter in his stomach. It wasn't fear. It was the awareness that this mattered. He raised his right hand, and the projector on his left wrist captured the movement. On the giant screen behind him, a light began to shine. It wasn't a ready-made image, wasn't a pre-programmed animation. It was Leo drawing in the air with his fingers, guided by inspiration that came from all those years of silence, from all those nights of projection, from all the words he kept inside until he found the right way to express them. He drew a star, then another, then another. On the screen, slowly, a constellation began to form. The audience recognized that image. It was the same constellation he had projected on the ceiling of his room years ago, when he asked if Luna could stay. But now it was larger, more complex, fuller of light. The stars were connected by lines forming shapes. A large star in the center, shining brighter than all the others. That was his mother. A medium star beside it, steady. That was his father. A small but intense star. That was him. And beside his father, a star that shone with a different color. That was Luna. And around all of them, a circle that enveloped them, the Institute. But Leo didn't stop there. He continued drawing in the air, and new stars began to appear. They weren't stars representing family members. There were many, dozens, hundreds, each with a unique glow, each in a different position. The audience began to understand. They were the children. All the children the Institute had helped over the years. Leo was drawing a galaxy of voices that had been found, of silences that had been broken, of invisible connections that had been established. And at the center of it all, orbiting like a sun, the Institute that he and his parents had built. When the last star formed, Leo lowered his hands. The screen was illuminated by that pulsating, living, light-filled galaxy. And then he did something no one expected. He brought his hand to his mouth, not to silence himself, but to speak. And for the first time in his life, Leo spoke to an audience of 1,000 people, with a voice that had once been trapped inside him but now flowed freely like a river. "Good evening," he said. The sound of his voice spread to the auditorium, amplified by the speakers, but seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than any sound system could reach. "My name is Leo. I'm 10 years old. And I spent 6 months without saying a single word. He paused, looking at the audience, now in absolute silence. People say that when you lose your voice, you go silent. But that's not true. When you lose your voice, you keep speaking. You just speak with your hands, or with light, or with your heart. What you need is someone who knows how to listen. He looked toward the front rows, where Luna and Dr. Arthur sat, holding hands, eyes shining. Miguel was beside them, camera in hand, filming every second, but also with misty eyes. I was lucky, Leo continued. I found someone who knew how to listen. She didn't try to make me speak. She just stayed there with me in my silence. And she showed me that there are 1,000 ways to say, I love you, without opening your mouth. Today, I speak with my mouth. But I've never forgotten what I learned with my hands. And I never will. He paused again, and the entire audience held its breath. The institute my parents created isn't to teach children to speak. It's to teach the world to listen. Because deep down, everyone has a voice. It's just that sometimes it doesn't come out through the mouth. It comes out through the hands, through art, through silence. And that's okay. We just need someone who knows how to listen. I had that, and I want every child to have it too. Thank you. He made a gesture with his hands, a sign language sign he had learned with Luna in the first week. It was a sign for love. On the screen behind him, the galaxy he had drawn began to shine even brighter. All the stars blinked at once, as if responding, and then slowly the stars began to move. It wasn't a programmed effect. It was Leo with his hands, guiding each star to a place on the screen. He was making one last projection. When he finished, the galaxy had transformed into a new image. It was no longer a set of scattered stars. It was a figure, the silhouette of 3 people who were now 4, holding hands, united by constellations of light. And above them, 2 stars shone brighter than all. One was Christina. The other was Luna's daughter, Sophia, watching, protecting, celebrating. The auditorium erupted in applause. 1,000 people standing, applauding not only the boy on stage, but everything he represented. Luna was standing too, but she couldn't clap. Her hands were occupied, one holding Dr. Arthur's, the other pressed her chest, with a pendant shaped like hands making a sign for future still glowed. Leo looked at his parents and smiled. And in that smile were all the years of struggle, all the nights of projection, all the stored up words that had finally found way out. He was no longer the boy lost in deafening silence. He was living proof that even when the voice falls silent, communication never dies. It just waits for someone to appear with a light, a projector, an open heart, and say, hey, I'm here, and I know how to listen. Talk to me however you can. I'll understand. And that, my friends, is the last projection. The end of a story that began with a desperate announcement and ended with an entire galaxy of voices found. Because deep down, what we learn from Luna, from Leo, from Dr. Arthur, is that the turning point doesn't always come from where we expect. Sometimes it comes from a light on the wall, from a shared silence, from a choice to stay. And emotional healing, when it happens, doesn't erase the pain of the past. It just shows that even with scars, we can move forward. And the greater purpose isn't finding your voice. It's finding someone who listens to you. Look, if there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that we spend too much time trying to speak our own way and too little time learning to listen the way others do. Dr. Arthur wanted his son to speak again with his mouth. Luna taught that there are 1,000 ways to say, I love you, without opening your mouth. And you? How many invisible connections have you let slip by because you're waiting for the other person to speak your language? How many deafening silences have you ignored because you didn't learn to hear what they were saying? The turning point begins when we stop trying to fix and start simply being present. If this message resonated with you, share in the comments. What was the greatest connection you ever made without needing words? And subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell, because here we continue exploring these stories that show that true emotional healing doesn't come from formulas. It comes from encounters. See you next time.